Our assembly guest today is Mr. Paul Yearout, who has devoted the past 24 years working with teenagers. He travels 50,000 miles each year speaking in over 350 assemblies. Mr. Yearout has led student tours all across the United States, Canada, Mexico, and Europe. He has appeared in 100 high schools in Europe. Today, Mr. Yearout will speak on the subject, the now generation versus the stereo generation. Mr. Yearout.
Well, thank you very much. It's certainly a great pleasure to be in your school today, and I do appreciate all of you taking time to come to this assembly. Of course, I don't suppose you had too much choice, but that's the breaks. I realize when I walk out in front of a crowd like you, I've got two strikes on me. Number one, I'm an adult. I apologize. And then I'm going to make a speech, and that's about the worst combination you can have for young people. Sometimes I walk on the campus, a kid will come up and say, "Hey, are you the guy that's going to be in the assembly?" "Yes." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to speak." Ooh. So if you want to sleep, I don't really mind. That's right, get comfortable. But if you do sleep, I have one request. Please don't snore. You may wake up the kid next to you. You know, the other day I was in a drugstore drinking a Coke, and the kid came in, climbed up on the stool at the counter beside me. The waitress walked over and says, "What do you want?" He says, "Give me a Pepsi in a bowl." She says, "What are you, some kind of a nut?" So she poured a bowl of Pepsi and put it in front of him. He took a dead bird out of his pocket and put it in the bowl. And then he started singing the little song, "Come Alive." I was doing some assemblies in Ohio a couple of years ago, and one Sunday morning I was reading a newspaper in the city where I'd spent the weekend, and I noticed the day before on Saturday afternoon, a fellow had been walking down the streets of this community, not out in the slums or periphery, but right downtown, when two characters ran up, grabbed him by the arms, threw him to the sidewalk, stabbed him with a knife, took his billfold, and ran. Well, fortunately, he wasn't injured too severely, so when the police finally arrived on the scene, he was trying to describe his assailants to them. And a curious crowd of onlookers gathered. Well, the victim noted most of the onlookers had also curiously watched during the attack. Nobody tried to help. So he turned to a businessman who was standing there, and he said, "Sir, you stood in your shop window 10 feet from here and watched those men assault me, but you didn't come out and try to do anything till they'd ran away. Why didn't you come out here and try to help?" The businessman replied, "Who, me? You think I want to get involved?" Now, kids, I don't like to admit it, but I fear this is a very accurate description of too many of my generation. Not yours, but mine. Because it seems to me that many of my generation are only interested in bigger homes, 2 cars in the garage, color television, plusher carpets, old age security, longer vacations, and get drunker this week than last. Of course, we're always standing around yelling about the mess the country's in. "Oh, it's terrible. Somebody ought to do something." But don't bother me. In fact, I call my generation the stereo generation because a lot of us talk out of both sides of our mouths at once. Out of this side, we're always telling your generation that you ought to be fantastic young people, live exemplary lives, be model citizens and students, and get good grades. Then too many of us are out talking, living, acting like the devil, and we wonder what's happening to you. Like father's home cheating on the income tax and never gets it why his kid's down at the high school cheating on a history test. You know, my father used to tell me when I was a kid, "Now, see here, young man, you do as I tell you, not as I do," but it doesn't really work out like that. I think the stereo generation is well exemplified by a mother who stands talking to her little boy like this. "Now, Sonny, Mama wants to talk to you. Are you listening?" "Now, Sonny, Mother doesn't want you to smoke because it isn't healthy." I went to a school one day to do an assembly. I got there a little bit early. I didn't want to hang around the campus, so I went downtown to do a little shoplifting. Well, I was walking down the street. 2 women came up to me. One was carrying a little decorated tin can with a slot in the top, and this is the way she walked up. "Sir, would you like to donate to our cancer fund?" I was doing assemblies in Texas last fall, and at Thanksgiving I flew home to spend the time with my family. Well, the plane just got airborne out of Houston. The little lighted sign went off that said no smoking, and the gentleman next to me opened his flip-top box, offered me a filter tip, and I said, "No, thank you, sir, I don't smoke." He says, "Oh, please, come on, it's wonderful. It's a great way to go." Well, he didn't really say that, but a surprising number of people have said, "Boy, are you lucky. I wish I didn't." You know, it's rather interesting that a little guy, when he's about 12 years old, usually starts smoking to prove he's a man. And then 30 years later, a lot of them are trying to quit to prove exactly the same thing. But what really bothers me is, what are you girls trying to prove? That you're men? You know, fellas, I wouldn't call it a very lucky strike if every time you kissed your girl you smelled a camel. After assembly one day, I was invited down to the faculty lounge. I wasn't quite sure why, but it turned out to be for coffee. And so one of the ladies that taught there seated next to me turned to me and said, "Mr. Yearout, I thought that was a marvelous speech you gave our kids. Boy, you told them what they needed to hear." And I said, "Thank you very much, ma'am. And what do you teach?" "Health." You know, drinking's another problem that kids have, and I'm not talking about milk either. I spent a couple of weeks in assemblies in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and one night while I was there, 500 teenagers had a beer bust. Imagine, 500 kids. They had 3 barrels of beer stashed away in an old vacant house, and I want to tell you they were really having a party. Things were just starting to swing when some idiot called the police, and they came racing in their cruisers with the red lights flashing and the sirens blowing, and they raided this teenage beer bust. But you know, the police got there too late, because by the time they'd arrived, the kids had already drunk the beer and they didn't get any. I'm always intrigued by parents who stand around and tell their teenagers, "Now, see here, kids, you can't drink. It isn't legal for you." Blah, 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 blah. Father comes home looped about twice a week. Mother's down at some bar with a beer in her hand, says to one of her friends, "Shay, I wonder what's the matter with my kid. He's turning out to be a drunk." A principal told me one day, "You know, Mr. Yearout, we used to have a drinking problem on our campus a couple of years ago. We had a boy attending our high school who looked 25. He is actually only 20. And every time the kids came to this campus at night, like for game, party, or dance, this boy would get there first with his car loaded with illegally purchased liquor. Then he'd park off in some dark area, and when the other kids got there, the guys would sneak over to his car and buy their bottles from him at 100% markup. He was making nothing but money, and the boys were getting nothing but stoned. Well, one night at a school dance, the principal said, "Boy, we thought something had gone wrong, because quite a few of the guys were lying around on the floor." So after a little investigation, he called his kid to his office the next day, and he said, "All right, Junior, the rest of the school year, the only time you come on this campus is in the morning for classes. When the class day ends, leave. Don't come back nights or weekends. Furthermore, you no longer can participate in our extracurricular activities. If there's any other trouble, you won't even be in class." Well, the next day, the kid was supposed to go on a field trip with some other students and was informed he could not go. So guess what? The next morning, Junior came to school with Mommy and Daddy. He was only 6'4" and weighed 220. And they went marching in the principal's office, and would you believe who did the speaking? Mama. Which, in my humble opinion, is another thing that's wrong with too many American homes. About the only thing a lot of fathers ever run around the house anymore are the vacuum cleaners and dishwashers. In fact, you know why there's so many fat husbands? The only time they open their mouth at home is to put food in. So Mama said to the principal, "Now you see here, I'll tell you that my boy's going to go on that field trip." And the principal replied, "No." "He is too. I said he is not going." "You can't discriminate against my boy just because he has a lot of crummy friends that ratted on him." And then Papa spoke up and said, "That's all right, son. If you want to drink, I'll get the liquor for you. And if your friends want to drink with you, I'll get it for them, because it is certainly none of this man's business." And they walked out of the office. With parents like that, the kid really didn't need any enemies. Someone said to me not too long ago, "Mr. Yearout, you work with teenagers. Don't you think this generation's going to the dogs?" And I said, "No, I certainly do not. But if they do, I'll know why." He said, "Why?" "Because too many of them are being raised in doghouses." It's my considered judgment a teenager in trouble is nothing more nor less, with very rare exceptions, than a product of the home out of which he comes and the community in which he lives. I believe they bear an equal and a dual responsibility. The last 5 years, I've had the great privilege of speaking in well over 2,000 high schools across America to over 1 million young people in assemblies and to hundreds on a personal basis. I have become tremendously impressed with your generation. In fact, I'd like to tell you as honestly as I know how what I think of your generation. I believe without doubt that you are the finest generation of youth that this country or any others ever produced. But I didn't get that idea reading newspapers. You know, almost every place I've been, I discovered people like you carrying on wonderful projects on behalf of their local community that cost the kids time, talent, energy, sometimes their own money. But I've never read about these projects on the front page of a newspaper. But I've never been anywhere where if a small minority of young people get in some kind of serious trouble, whether it's a beer bust, a sex party, or a bad accident, but what they have 4-inch headlines on the front page and all the sort of details, while the multiplied thousands of tremendous and wonderful accomplishments of your fine generation, if that ever makes the press, which is seldom, it's usually on the back page with the obituary announcements. I think your PR is not very good, and it's created, in my opinion, 3 major problems. Number 1, it's given a very false impression of American youth. Number 2, it's created too much hostility between my generation and yours. But to me, the most serious aspect is the fact that a lot of potentially fine young people who read these headlines and the crummy magazine articles they so often write about you in magazines have decided, gee, I must not be normal. Why, I haven't even killed anybody yet. I better get with it. You know, I used to drive a Mustang. I got one of the first ones that came out when they were really quite a novelty. And I'd drive up in front of a high school in that Mustang. If there were any guys outside, they'd usually start walking up, and then I'd get out. And it was hilarious because the moment I stepped out of that Mustang, the guys would, hey, look at that old bald-headed guy driving the Mustang. And then some kid would walk up with his friends and stand there and say, hey, how fast will that thing go, huh? And I'd say, I don't know. You what? You mean you've never opened it up? No. And this guy's older than he looks. Some other kid would usually say, well, have you got 4 on the floor? And I'd say, no, I'm old and shiftless. Teenagers ought to be the best drivers in America. You've got everything going for you, your health, your youth, your quick reaction, good eyesight, good hearing. But according to these insurance records, you're the worst drivers, and this really bothers me because you're my friends. And I've been trying to figure out what in the world is the problem, and you know I've discovered it. I believe there are a lot of fellows on the high school campus today who aren't quite sure what a car's for. Well, if they don't know, you can't blame them. So today, men, I thought I'd tell you. Brace yourselves, boys. A car is to get from point A to point B, transportation, would you believe, alive? Now, isn't that profound? But you know what a lot of fellows use a car for? Well, for a status symbol or an equalizer. There's usually some scrawny little guy on the campus who can't make the football team, but, buddy, he can get behind the wheel of a high-powered car and run the fullback off in the ditch. I can't understand these characters that walk around the campus all day being so courteous and polite to their fellow students and teachers, and then the moment they get behind the wheel of that car after school, their whole personality changes. You watch some of the guys that drove to school today when it's out this afternoon, grab their favorite girl by the hair and a couple of their buddies and race out to that car and get behind the wheel and start winding up that engine and racking off the pipes and saying to everybody, boy, look me over, man, I am something. Well, you are, but I have no idea what it is. You know, every morning on my way to my first school, I usually see a kid sitting down at some stoplight in his bucket of bolts, and some other kid will pull up beside him in his set of threadbare wheels, and they'll sit at that red light eyeing each other. And the minute the light turns green, boy, the kid that gets the next light first, sliding all 4 wheels, what a big man. Woo! He's really proved something. What? That he's got 4 carburetors? That he's really a big wheel, which means his head looks like a hubcap? You know, guys, the mark of real maturity and manhood would be the ability to sit in your car. Let that moron bait you. If he wants to leave half his tires on the street, let him. If he wants to burn a gallon of gas on the way to the next light, let him. You'll get there, of course, and you drive up beside him, and you're all calm and collected and casual and cool. He's going to look at you with a sneer because he's a big, tough man. What's the matter, buddy? No guts? Yeah, I got guts, but I don't want to see them. You know what they say about a lot of you guys? A girl takes her life in her hands every time she rides with you in your car, but it's a lot more dangerous when you stop. I do believe some of your halos are pinching. This brings me to another subject I'd like to talk about, a little three-letter word that you spell, sex. You mean right here in front of God and everybody? You know, there's a big communication gap between your generation and mine, but it's nowhere as evident as in this area because we seldom ever talk about the subject, or we do it in some ridiculous manner, where a guy gets up in front of a bunch of people like you and says, now this afternoon, children, I want to talk to you about sex. And you all sit back laughing up your sleeves because you know more than the guy speaking. Now, I'll be ready to quickly grant you the most logical place for this discussion is a home if parents in an open, frank, and intelligent manner would begin the discussion with their children when they're 5 or 6 years of age and right up the ladder. Then so many parents say, I can't communicate with my kids. That is, till it's too late. Boy, when the little girl 15 has to come home from high school and tell her parents she's about to become an unwed mother, then it is really amazing how well the parents can communicate. Then they usually give out with a speech that goes something like this. You stupid kid, what in the world have you done? You've ruined us in this community. What are all the neighbors going to say? We'll have to move out of town. They wallow in self-pity. Well, it seems to me at that moment the girl has a few problems, too. Now, not in every case, but in far too many cases where a girl ends up with this kind of a problem, it's been preceded by her mother, who, when the little gal was 12, 13, and 14, Mama was frantically running around buying her little girl high heels and nylons, foundation garments, a beauty parlor hairdo and makeup, and saying, oh, darling, come on, Mother wants you to grow up. Oh, honey, you've got to have a social life. Mama wants you to go to all those wonderful parties and dances with all those nice boys. And who ever heard of a girl 12, 13, and 14 dating a kid that same age? Did you ever try making out on a bicycle? So every place I go, I see these little girls 12, 13, and 14 out dating boys 16, 17, 18, 19. Guys who stand around and say, boy, do I know women. Yeah, man. I'll bet some of you characters know women so well you couldn't date a girl your own age if your life depended on it. You have to rob the cradle and pick on those little babies. Of course, you kids are really con artists. You're always going home and telling your parents, now, come on, Ma and Pa, things have changed since you were a kid, and have they ever? If your parents knew how much they'd changed, they'd all drop dead with heart attacks. But you know, a lot of young people go home and say, come on now, the rule down at our school is we all stay out till 4 in the morning. And a surprising number of parents respond, my goodness, is that a fact? I didn't know that. Johnny goes home, he's 14 years old, says, gee whiz, Mom, my friend Bill's 15, he's been drunk already. And Mother says, no kidding? Boy, we've got to keep up with the Joneses. Here's your bottle, get busy. Now, let me make one thing extremely clear. I am not knocking all the parents in the country. I want that understood. I know there are some fabulous and some wonderful parents, and I know that many of you seated in this auditorium have wonderful parents, and I'm going to tell you what wonderful parents are. Those who care enough about their teenagers to want to know where they're going, with whom and by what means, what they're going to be doing while they're there, when they're coming home, but especially what they're going to be doing on the way home. Now, I am not talking about the overly strict parent. I've seen this kind, too, who says to the teenager, now, see here, kids, you can't date till you're 25. Now, that's equally ridiculous, stupid, and disastrous, but it's usually the other type. The kind of a parent who says, well, kid, I don't know what the rules are these days. You go with your friends, have fun, and when you stagger in at 3 in the morning, don't wake me up. I need my rest. And with all this so-called freedom and privilege, you get into some kind of a jam, and the same parent will stand there and say, you stupid kid, what'd you do that for? Let me tell you, guys and gals, if you're so lucky is to have parents who, because of their love and concern, have established some broad guidelines of control for your life, certainly giving you all kinds of maneuvering room to develop your social skills. You are one lucky teenager. Because frankly, there aren't too many parents left with this kind of courage. Some of you with this kind of fine parent probably do a lot of griping, but I want to tell you someday you'll look back and thank God. A family came to visit us at Christmas time at our home. They have a little girl, 10. She's very pretty and quite mature for 10, but I couldn't believe it when they walked into our home. This little gal was wearing net stockings, a little miniskirt, a very fancy beauty parlor hairdo, eyeshadow, lipstick, earrings that hung down on her shoulders, and she come walking in. I've got a boy, 11, who only thinks about football and thinks all girls are yuck. He didn't know what it was when I came in. The little girl said to me that afternoon, well, Mr. Yearout, maybe I'm only 10 and Fred's 11, but I'm more mature than he is. I said, how's that, honey? Why, she says, he hasn't even noticed me yet. And boy, I know about the boys. My wife said to that mother, say, what's with all the garbage on your kid? And the mother says, oh, well, I know it's silly and everything, but all her little friends dress that way, and she wants to be like them, and how can I stand the pressure? I can't say no. My wife said, good night, what are you going to do by the time she's in junior high school? And the mother says, oh, I shudder to think what it'll be like. Well, I know what it'll be like. I walked into a junior high principal's office last year. The man was on the verge of tears. He said, Mr. Yearout, this is the saddest day of my life, I believe. I just completed a conference, one of our 13-year-old girls and her parents. She had to drop out of school to have a baby. It'll be born while she's still 13. And that isn't rare, it isn't unusual, it isn't isolated. In fact, in 1966, over 5,000 girls in this country, aged 14 and under, gave birth to illegitimate children. I haven't been in any high school or junior high school campus anywhere in this United States, and I don't care how small or big or isolated the school is, that doesn't have its share of little girls who are becoming mothers even before they're ready to become women. In fact, in Oklahoma, I was doing assemblies down there, and right across the border in Texas, in Amarillo last October, a 12-year-old girl gave birth to a baby that had been fathered by her stepfather's 23-year-old brother. Boy, what a wholesome family. I receive about 50 or 60 letters a week from young people across the country who write to me about their problems because of my speaking in schools. I received a letter a month ago from a girl who said, Mr. Yearout, I had my first experience with sex at age 15. The second experience came barely past age 16 with a, quote, 21-year-old man, end of quote. And then she said, a few weeks later, I met this divine, dreamy guy. And it's been the most heavenly 7 months of my life because his father married my mother. And so for the past 7 months, we've been able to sleep together every night and make love together. But now he's gone into service, and since he went into the service, I discovered he'd been cheating on me. But then I'm going to give him a second chance because he gave me one. But Mr. Yearout, the problem I'm writing to you about is the fact that his younger brother wants to take over where he left off. What shall I do? I'm getting a little tired of my generation standing around and pointing to girls like this with an accusing finger and saying, look at that little two-bit tramp. Let me tell you something, young people. The only way you produce a two-bit tramp is with a 12.5-cent mother and a 0 father.